Hello. Welcome to the ninth part of the necromancer's evolutionary traits. At the beginning of this part, we see that the boy says, "How could you do this to me? You, more than anyone else, should know how much effort I put into this." Student says, "Isn't Senior Giralf mistaken? I never expected a teacher to be the type to." Andrea says, "What do you think?" Lucia says, "If it's Professor Vauban, I think he probably did it." Andrea says, "I was thinking the same thing." Lucia says, "Hold on. Where are you going?" She thinks, "And I even saved him yesterday." "Well, I won't care about you anymore. You stupid, stubborn seaweed." Andrea says, "Professor, I have a question related to the ingredients of the potion." Professor says, "Andreas, can't you see that this isn't a good time?" Andrea says, "But it's related to this situation. If this is your own work, you should be able to prove that you made it right here, right now, right?" Professor gets scared and thinks this. His student says, "Proving he made it. You mean like the Magic Tower examination?" Andrea says, "If you truly made the potion, you should be able to explain why you used which materials easily. Or perhaps you're not confident enough." Professor says, "Not confident, you say? How cheeky. I am a professor at the prestigious Rodlin Academy." Andrea says, then answers this question. "Why did you change the upriver resin to cytomine petals?" Professor gets scared and thinks, "I was so distracted by the presentation day that I forgot to check that part." Student says, "Why aren't you answering right away?" "Because, by using the petals, we can cut costs. If you were the one developing it, you would have known." "I see. Now, about the proportions. What the hell do you think you're doing? Only the magic towers can perform potion examinations. Last question. Why did you use the more expensive jelly beetle instead of papina powder?" Other students say, "Why isn't the professor answering? Did he really steal it?" To think he would claim the research of his student as his own. That is because Professor says, "Paprika powder has a hallucinogenic effect. That's why I used beetles instead, even though they are more costly." Student says, "Professor, that's not why I didn't use the powder. The reason was that the powder gets heated for a long time while the potion is being made, which can give the one who consumes it a stomachache." Professor says, "You are wrong. It's definitely because of the hallucinogenic effect." Student says, "About that, I just remembered something. You did tell me the powder had side effects, but you didn't tell me it was a hallucinogen. So could you please explain how you came up with that answer? Have you got no shame as a scientist? To think that you would go as far to steal credits from your disciple. Resign right now. They are the scammers. You two set this up, didn't you? I will report both of you to the disciplinary committee." Andrea says, "He's really reached rock bottom. When a child throws a tantrum, there's no choice but to leave it to the adults. If you're so annoyed, I can ask Sir Alvin to set up a place for you to explain it to him." Andrea says, "It should be possible, since I am being sponsored by him." Lucia thinks, "Wow, he's using the card to buy materials to threaten him. Maybe he'll fall for it." Andrea says, "What's wrong? Don't you want to explain yourself?" That Bart? An eagle is watching them. He thinks, this Vauban guy, since he's caused such a commotion, he'll have to pay for it. He thinks, but that brat really did his research, didn't he? He knew the theory and the ingredients behind the awakening potion. It really might be possible for him to discover a new medicine before the year ends. I'll be looking forward to it, Kane's son. After that we see at the Academy cafeteria. Lucia thinks, he actually invited me to eat together, but to think it would be in the Academy's cafeteria. Andrea says, "Aren't you going to eat? It's so good." She says, "I will." She touches the food, and it is really hot. Andrea says, "You should do it like this, rich lady. Grab it at the edge like this, then drown it in sauce." Lucia says, "It doesn't matter that I'm rich." She thinks, to think that you could. He thinks, also enjoys eating in the cafeteria. Vivian says, "Me too." That. Here, take it. Lucia says, "By the way, Senior, when are you going to buy your tablet? If you have one, you'd be notified if an event like the one today were to happen again, and you wouldn't miss it. Isn't that useful?" Andrea says, "But I'm saving money right now." Lucia says, "It's not even that expensive in the first place." Vivian thinks, "Mr. Fairy gave me meat." Andrea says, Nothing is expensive for a rich lady like you. Lucia says, hey, seaweed. Vivian says, do you also want my reward, Mr. Fairy? Andreas says, no need. By the way, why are you even calling me Mr. Fairy? Andreas says, I'll be going now. Lucia says, what the hell? Didn't we just eat? Well, see you later then. Andreas says, bye, see you later too, Vivian. Sharon. Andreas thinks, he finally came back. Andreas says, it seems that you have returned from your trip, Master. Sharon says, come to my lab at noon tomorrow. Andreas says, understood. He thinks, just in time. After that we see at the Rodlin Academy Alvin Street. World Hammer Handlings. Andreas buys a sword and thinks, he's the type of guy that thinks that everything I have is his, so I don't doubt that he will try to take the page of sloth from me by force. So it's better if I also have this. Andreas says, this one, please. Diane appears there and says, Andreas? Diane says, what are you doing at a blacksmith? Andreas says, I needed a sword. Diane says, a sword? But aren't you a mage? Andreas says, it's good to have at least one for self-defense. This? It's a present for my ogre of a brother. Andreas thinks, brother, does she mean Carlos Alvin? Carlos Alvin is the Alvin household's oldest son. He left to train to become a warrior. We got along pretty well before. Carlos had already died when the game started, so the game just glossed over him. If I'm not mistaken, he died at the Academy's end-of-year event. After Hazar escaped from the Duke Balaric's territory, he joined a religious cult, the Zephyro cult, the same cult that did the terrorist attack. Andreas says, is Carlos also participating in the end-of-year event? Diane says, yes. Andreas says, it would be nice if we could meet again, just the three of us. Diane says, is that so? She thinks, after hearing what everyone had been saying about him, I'm not sure that he's somehow changed. Diane thinks, how should I ask him? Don't worry, I'll just ask him normally. Andreas says, is there something you want to say? Well then, see you later. Diane says, I want to know why. Andreas thinks, after thinking about Carlos for a bit, there's still time until the terrorist incident occurs. After that we see at the Academy Teaching Department. Sharon says, I've been searching the whole continent for a material of the same quality as Angela, but so far I haven't been able to find one. Sharon says, so, I intend to keep searching a little longer. My hopes aren't high, but I need it for the congregation this weekend. Andreas thinks, this is where the game begins. If he gets blinded by greed and asks me to give it to him, I win. Andreas says, we are going to be busy for the time being, so brace yourself. Master, I'd like to talk to you about something. Sharon says, what is it? Andreas says, I managed to get the Apocalypse Codex. Sharon says, don't say such stupid things. That is not something the likes of you could get their hands on. Andreas says, this is not something I can handle. He brings out Sloth and says, so. Andreas says, I want you to have it. Sharon says, you keep it. This is a highly sought-after item, so keeping it would only spell trouble. Take it to the congregation, so we can exchange it for another item. Andreas thinks, that's what I thought you'd say, given that you're the type to prioritize your own life over anything else. Sharon says, since we have to go to the congregation this weekend, clear your schedule and prepare yourself. He says, understood, Master. He thinks, eastern edge of the city, the confinement zone forest of captivity adjacent area. Andreas says, I made it through Sharon in one piece, but now the problem is going to the congregation. There are many dangerous individuals there, and words won't get through to them, so I'll have to negotiate as safely as possible. Sharon says, I'll be able to trade the Page of Sloth for items that will help me grow. I will take anything I can get for it. Andreas thinks, he's completely sure that the Page of Sloth is already his. But when push comes to shove, he'll be using me as a shield. Their carriage suddenly stops. Someone says, hey, you guys are going to the congregation, right? Mind if I ride along with you? Andreas thinks, that man says, thank God. He thinks, Salem Edidia, one of the continent's greatest 10. He is even willing to deal with the forbidden for the sake of exploring, which is why he became known as the devil in pursuit of the truth. Andreas thinks, if the information about the Page of Sloth got leaked, the situation may not turn out as well. What's with that expression?
Oi.
Are you dissatisfied since I'm going to the congregation? Not at all, Sir Salem. He starts to laugh and says, Don't worry, boy. I've already gone there several times. Andreas says, I knew he was insane, but to think he would go this far. He says, By the way, boy, what's your name? Introduce yourself. He's your senior, Salem Edidia. Andreas tells him his name. He is surprised and says, Oh my God, so you've gotten your hands on another Cromwell? Andreas thinks, what is he talking about? He's saying it in a way that suggests there's some kind of secret about the Cromwell family. He says, looks like the kid doesn't know anything. Well then, how about I give you one special piece of advice? Struggle as much as possible. Andreas thinks, his face tells me I shouldn't ask anything about it. What the hell is Sharon hiding from me? They suddenly stop again. He says, What do you want? If you have something to talk about, do it in person, Dragon. Someone appears in front of their carriage. Sorry about that. He says, It's been a long time, Sharon Diprin. The 9th part of the Necromancer's evolutionary traits ends here. If you want to see more, please subscribe and like. And if you want to support me financially, you can join my channel membership or Patreon only for $1. Patreon and Discord links are in the description if you want to support me. And a special thanks to all my Patreons for supporting me. Thanks for watching.